morning. Thank you for joining us here today for the special workshop, How to Select the Best SCM Software for Your Organization. My name is Brandon Cohen, and I'm an editor and a writer here at Tech. Tech's an impartial global advisory firm that specializes in software selection and digital transformation. Today's workshop is brought to you by Tech's co-founder and CTO, Mehdi Aftahi, with a special thanks to techwebinars.com for their partnership and their support in making today's workshop happen. Just before we get started, though, I'd like to make a note that we'll have a question period post-presentation. At the time, we ask that you raise your hands and open your mic, and we'll get to you in an orderly fashion. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation and discussion, and we'll have something special to share with you at the end, so stay tuned. Thank you very much, and let's get started. Mehdi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Before we start, I just wanted to thank Techno Webinars for arranging these series of webinars that we touched based on the ERP, CRM, and some other disciplines. Today, we're looking at the best the best ways to select the CRM SCM systems for your business. So, as an introductory, Tech is a company that specializes in helping our clients going through the selection of different various applications. And SCM is one of the most sought after business applications in the market these days. For obvious reasons, it affects the supply of the organizations and affects the operations greatly. Now, like any other enterprise applications, when you're trying to select the SCM application, there are some challenges that you have to go through, and some of the challenges that buyers are facing these days, they typically start with technology challenges. So there is the question of what's the marketing rhetoric versus facts about the applications, about the capabilities of the applications. At the same time, the capability of the service providers in terms of what they deliver and what versus what they promise to deliver. Is there any software and hardware compatibility between this SCM and the different applications that you have in-house? And some key technology decisions that have to be made versus going to cloud, on-premise, security, concerns, and so on. The compatibility, data, and everything else that goes around it. And also the proper implementation and business processes that are going to cover. So these are the technical challenges that companies are facing. And beside that, there are some internal challenges that they face and they struggle with. That these companies have limited resources internally, which also combined with the lack of evaluation and selection expertise, it puts them in a very hard situation in terms of negotiating with the vendors and understanding their needs, which also a challenge in terms of building consensus among the different stakeholders within the organization, which also amplified by the communication gaps between the different departments, stakeholders internally, and also with the suppliers, being the vendors or the service providers. Now, once you pass these two sets of challenges, and if you pass that, you start your project and you start with having challenges within the project and management of the project itself. And that's often the companies realize that they don't have a complete requirement set, and the scope is not very clear. They don't know where the application starts and where it ends, and that leads to scope creep and other issues that you have in terms of the implementation of enterprise applications. Also, we often find that organizations they have a difficulty in terms of measuring the success of the implementation, and it multiplies or amplified by insufficient planning that has to be done. That all goes into the management of the project and the failure at the end of the implementation of the proper application. So it's not all about technology, it's not about all the internal challenges, it's a combination of these challenges that somehow runs in a circle, and somehow we have to break that circle and make sure that we have a proper way of going forward. Now, what we do at Tech, we try to break that circle and make a proper selection process, and create a plan that organizations can actually go through the selection and evaluation of this SCM process properly. So for us, the process starts with nothing other than proper requirements gathering. So before getting into the technology side, before getting into anything other than your requirements, you need to understand what your business is, what your business needs are, and capture all of those without even talking to any vendors and complicating the issue. So that means that you understand your business requirements, you clearly identify the scope of the project in terms of which business processes are inside the new application and which ones are falling out, which also allows you to understand if there is any interaction between the system that you're purchasing and any adjacent system that, for example, you're going to integrate your CRM system or your ERP system into your SCM system if there is a need for it. And you can define the success factors. Like, what do you call a successful implementation from the entire organization's point of view? And once you do that, you freeze the scope, which means that your scope of the application, after doing all this due diligence, is going to be fixed, and with that you can actually get the consensus built internally within your team. So you can actually go back to your requirements, and if there is no consensus, you can actually expand or collapse some of the items within your scope to make sure that your entire team is bought into the to the requirements, and that also sets a good level of expectation of everybody inside and involved in your project, which is one of the major components of your change management. So that means that your change management starts right from the get-go. You're starting by basically planning your resources and also filling the gaps from the internal resources that you're going to be using in your SCM project, and backfill those positions so your day-to-day operations are not going to be affected. You can also take advantage of experienced consultants to help you during this phase, not to cover the task within your organization, but also help you in the selection and evaluation process. And very importantly, build some time in building consensus amongst your stakeholders, and get their buy-in, set the right level of expectations for everybody involved in the project. Now, once you do that, now you have the scope of the project, you have the expectations set, and you have the consensus. This is where you can actually get into a proper evaluation process with getting the vendors involved. So you can get the proper technical information, hopefully from independent sources, not only from the vendors. And you need to also understand what really is being offered, and more importantly, what is not being offered. So these are the gaps that you may actually have to fill later on during the process. So because you understand your scope and what you want. And if you basically overlap that with the capabilities of the vendors, you will see each of the vendors the areas where they cannot offer you the solution, and you go with the vendor that has the least holes in their solution. And make sure that the technology decisions are part of your planning process. What does that mean? It means that if you're going with a cloud, or where you're going with your security concerns, or any of the technical aspects of the decision that has to be made, is part of the decision right up front. Which means that if you have, for example, some compliance issues or some regulatory constraints that you have on your applications, you have to define that upfront and be open with the vendors and get them to respond to those requirements all upfront, and based on that, make your decision on go or not to go with certain vendors, which allows you to avoid customizations and minimize the level of customization going forward within the implementation. And which means that at the end, you're going to select the best application that has the most process fit for your business. So we're doing all of this based on your requirements. So we're trying to fit the solution to your requirements and not the other way around. And often when vendors are involved from the get-go, you are trying to fit your business to the vendor's offering, which is the wrong way of looking at it. Now, having said all of that, what does that really mean in terms of the process? So based on our methodology, there are 4 distinct phases of the evaluation and selection process. The first phase, which is to us is one of the most important parts, and that's where you actually have to spend considerable amount of time internally within your organization, is the planning phase, which is to map out a consolidated view of your business strategy, processes, and your current enterprise architecture. Now, if you're talking about an SCM project, you still need to map out your architecture to see where your application, SCM application, fits in the bigger picture, because you don't want to have an SCM application that is, standing out as an outlier or standing separate from the rest of your system. The most important part of any implementation of software, it has to be a seamless operation from your operational point of view. So that means that you need to understand your architecture and include or exclude certain processes within the SCM or within the application in question. Now, once you understand that, you can then define the target enterprise architecture. Yeah, and in this case, you may want to have, you may expand the footprint of your SCM project to include some of the other applications that you currently have in place, whether it being a standalone application, add-ons, or something else that you currently use. So you may want to include as much processes as possible, and to a level where the integration is actually it's possible with other applications in your organization. Once you finalize your target architecture, you build your plan or the master plan for the project. This allows you, based on this exercise of the planning, you get your project scope. You know where the project starts, which processes are covered, which processes are not covered, and which gaps may exist where you actually have to get some other solutions involved. Now, phase 2, the next step is a technical assessment. So which means that based on the current scope and the current processes and the wish list of processes, you can actually create a functional and technical requirements list. So what that means is that you create a functional and technical requirements set that corresponds to those business processes. This is a language where the vendors can tell you if they support that feature or not, as opposed to, do you do this process? So, for example, if you're talking about supplier rating, you can actually put those in terms of how do you rate the different suppliers within the supply chain management system. And based on this information, you can evaluate the vendors against that functional requirement set, which means that it gives you we can actually tell you which capabilities of the vendors are available for a specific function, and based on the total score, you can actually shortlist the vendors in your evaluation. So typically, we start with maybe 10 or 15 different vendors to begin with, and at the end of this exercise, which is the technical assessment, we hope to get between 3 to 4 vendors or potential solutions for our clients. So once you do that, now this is the start of the third phase, which is the qualitative assessment. So it's not only enough to say that, okay, I support this feature or I don't support that feature. We would like to know how each of these features are supported, and if it's a business fit or process fit for our organization. So which means that we want to evaluate the vendors and implementers company in terms of their profile, service offerings, their revenue, their methodology, and what they're planning to do for their product going forward. What we also recommend our clients to do is to create this demo scripts, which highlights the critical processes that each of the vendors have to go through and present, and for your key stakeholders within the organization to sit down and go through that demo and understand if that or which one of the vendors of the shortlisted vendors deliver the critical processes better for your organization. And of course, the last one is the reference checks and some cost considerations. Now, that would be in the shape of an RFP or request for proposal, and will capture all that information. Based on all the information captured in the qualitative assessment, you can say that you completed the due diligence of the solution providers, which allows you to go into the last and the final phase, which is the negotiations. Now, very important and critical part of the process, which should not be, not only taken lightly, but also misplaced, because many projects that we see that the vendors are starting the negotiations right at the beginning, before even understanding what the requirements are. They try to sweeten the deal for you. They try to, divert the conversation into commercial proposals before going through the first 3 phases. So be very careful not to fall into that trap. So once you know your project plan, once you know the capabilities of the vendors and you know how they're allowed or they're going to deliver the solution for you with all the parameters defined, this is the only time that you can actually now get into a negotiation phase with the vendors, which is based on the selected list of vendors in an order. So you go with the first one, you negotiate the terms and conditions of the contract. And in this case, it's always helpful to have an experienced consultant with you to allow you to let you know the tricks and the holes that might be in the contract, which is usually typically given to you by the vendors. So and if you're getting a vendor contract and you're trying to sign it, you can be sure that there are one-sided terms and conditions in there. So many companies have procurement departments and legal departments, but typically they are not used to buying software. So they are in very well experienced in buying the regular items or the supplies for their own organization and their operation, but buying software probably is not some of the things that they do on a daily basis. So it's always good to have an experienced consultant help you going through that contract negotiation. And the final step is the cost, which is you need to do the cost negotiation based on a certain period of time. So there are certain vendors that have a very low starting cost. The first year or second year is very minimal, not considering the implementation cost. But then later on, the costs are building up. So our recommendation is to do the comparison between the vendors over a 5-year period of total cost of ownership, which means you're going to do the software license cost, implementation cost, any training, data migration, integration, and any other application based on your scope that needs to be included has to be taken into account with the total cost of ownership. And based on that, you can actually sign the contract and start the implementation process. Now, in terms of the important things that you need to consider in your roadmap is one of the things that you need to really take down is the functional scope of the new application. That means that you have to understand where the scope starts and where the scope ends. That's part of the overall planning of your project. And if there are any process gaps, how are you going to fill them? So are there going to be any external applications that needs to be purchased? Is there any partner solution that the vendor is going to offer you? Make sure that all of those are part of your planning at least. It doesn't mean that you have to always have all the solutions given to you by a single vendor, but you also need to know how you're going to fill those gaps. And you also need to know if there are any legacy systems that are going to be part of your future architecture. How are they going to be integrated? And if there is any problems, you have to know right from the get-go. And also the cost of the implementation, would that be including some of these items as we discussed? So you have to be very clear in terms of if the vendors are proposing to fill some of those gaps or do some of those integrations, you need to know if that's part of the deal or not. And there is nothing saying that I'm not saying that has to be, but has to be identified and clearly known before you starting your project. And the other very important aspect is, which is impacting the businesses, is to how are you going to do the implementation? Is it going to be a big bang or phased solution? It's very important for you as part of the planning in your operations in terms of how are you going to sort out the rollout of the SCM project? Is it going to be all at once? You retiring your old applications and processes and go with a solution right away, or are you going to do it in different phases? Another subject that is very important is the ROI, or return on investment, that typically the CEOs of the organization wants to know what they're getting themselves into before investing the time and money on the solutions. Now, when you're talking about an SCM functionality or SCM applications, typically we can talk about three main categories. The back office support, how the SCM integrates with the finance. Does it include or integrates with billing and invoicing? How do you manage contracts? To a certain degree, how does it integrate with analytics and reporting for the bigger picture in your organization? And also some technology considerations like single sign-on and so on, cloud and different aspects. Then we have the core functionality of the SCM applications. We can name some of these, but depending on the industry you are in, some of these functionality could be moved to niche, and some of the niche functionality can move into the core functionality. But at the end of the day, these are the main topics within SCM: order management, warehouse management, transportation management, supply relationship management, demand management, and order management. As I said, depending on your industry, you may actually have some of these move to the niche and complementary functionality. Now, the niche complementary functionality, which is the third bucket that I have here, is really depending on the industry you are in. They could be very, very important for you. And it doesn't mean that when something is not part of the core is not important. As the contrary, it could actually be very, very more, much more important than the core functionality per item. So that could be service parts planning, supply chain analytics, international trade logistics, which is if you are doing cross-border purchases and supplies, then that becomes very important. Workflow management, document management, and so on. So in an overall evaluation process, what we recommend is to have a 20% importance on the back office support, 50% in total on your core functionality, and 30% on the niche functionality. Now, thinking about niche functionality, there could be one or two, so that 30% can actually mean a lot. So you need to really find where those critical functionalities for you are and put the proper importance on them. At the same time, when we look at the SCM model that we have currently at TED, we are looking at around 2,578 criteria in total, and amongst which, if you break down the criteria, you can see that 28% of that 2,500 criteria comes from our warehouse management systems. 21% comes from relationship management, supplier relationship management, technology, supply chain analytics, transportation management, and so on. So that means that whether a module or a functionality has a lot of criteria or details in it, it does not mean that it has to affect your decision at the same proportion. So in a typical evaluation of an SCM, we put like 15% on warehouse management, 15% on supplier relationship management, 15% on demand management, and transportation management at 12, order management 12, supply chain analytics 9, and supply part services, service part planning 9%, and so on. So depending on your organization's requirements, needs, and processes, you can change the importance and level of importance for these. And that will show you how this affects the overall ranking. So basically, if a vendor has a stronger warehouse management, it only affects the 15% of the overall. So if, however, warehouse management is much more important for you, you can increase, so that way the vendors that have a stronger warehouse management, they will get a bigger score. Now, the way also we are categorizing or evaluating the vendors is by assigning to these criteria various levels of support, going from supported to 100%, and not supported or unrated is 0. And there are different levels of support in between. So for example, if you're doing it, if you're supporting it through an add-on software, it's 80%. If you're supporting the feature through customization, it's only 40%. So in a typical evaluation, we want to keep things above 70%, like anything supported through modification, which is screen configurations and support, reports, and simple modifications to the user interface. These are all acceptable. Anything below, which is third-party solutions or customizations, are not okay. Based on this analysis, I put together I'll go through the functionality that is being evaluated, and I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse into the vendors that we have selected for this presentation and how they're doing. So in a supply chain management, and as you saw before, if we're looking at the core functionality, these are the functionality that we consider as core. So warehouse management has these criteria underneath it. So you have the warehouse configuration, bin location setup, and how you actually configure your warehouse. At the same time, how adaptable the warehouse management is to your business processes, and how the decision are supported in terms of picking and choosing of the items within your warehouse. And also, there are some other considerations in terms of the technology, which is all the way from the security of your warehouse to radio frequency identifications, and other ways in which you can actually interact with your warehouse management systems and your items that are in and out of your warehouse. Transportation management system is also a very important part of the core functionality, which defining the systems, system definitions, and how do you create or set up your enterprise, administrations, locations, and so on. And also different management functionality in terms of the operations, which is the planning, execution, tracking, and network customization and analysis. So these are all part of a very good, if you want to have a good transportation management system as part of your supply chain, you need to have some or all of these functionality, depending on, again, your industry and your requirements. Another part of the supply chain management system is the supplier relationship management, which is, again, part of the core. So how do you source, how do you basically procure, fulfill, or even manufacture some of the items, or order for manufacturing of the supplies from different individual suppliers. And also demand management, which is part of the one of the key aspects of the supply chain, depending on the orders, depending on your production schedule, how you actually manage your demand and place the orders for the supplies. So this is all the different aspects of demand management that we can go through in details, and also the order management, because these orders are actually part of the overall supply chain and how you actually get orders in and also order from the suppliers. If we're looking at some of the niche and complementary applications functionality, we can look at the international trade logistics, which is collaboration and the content in terms of compliance, logistics, and the different products, and also the financial functionality, warehouse management system across the borders, and also management of the transportation. In terms of the supply chain analytics, which is very, very important part of the supply chain functionality, is how do you manage, trigger different events, and how do you optimize your network of suppliers and supplies, and also how does it work with production planning, and how do you do strategic supply chain planning and understanding the process going forward. Service parts planning it's to do with how do you get spare parts and supplies for your operations or for your products going out. If we look at the overall, based on these criteria, what I have done, I have picked a bunch of vendors that are currently in the market, from QAD, Infor, Pronto, Microsoft Dynamics, PeopleSoft, Macola, Elite, and Logility. There are some of the vendors, and there's a bunch of other vendors that I could have added to this evaluation. And as you can see, the level of support for each of these vendors across different modules are varied. So let's look in, see overall how each of these vendors are actually compared to each other. So you can see that from QAD being 85% coverage to 61% from Logility, these are the ranges of the application. It doesn't mean that Logility is not good. It's just like based on the current evaluation and the priorities that we put in place, they're scoring at 61%, which could actually be good considering what you guys actually need. So in terms of the warehouse management system, you can see that, for example, Macola is not so strong. So there is a lack of functionality across the board, and probably is going to reflect on the overall score. But you can see that from a functionality point of view, you have multiple vendors that are pretty good. There is Logility here, which basically on the adaptability within the warehouse management system is actually very good. So again, it shows like in a case-by-case basis, a vendor that may not be overall as getting the good score it may have a very niche functionality that can be very useful for you. So as you can see, the overall Logility, which was at the bottom of the list, now is part of the top scores here. So again, Elite now is the #1 in the warehouse management, then Pronto, then QAD, Microsoft. These are all within a couple of percentage point difference between each other. And then you have Infor, Logility, PeopleSoft, and Macola is falling right behind as we expected. So the idea is that the vendors that you're talking about, once you have your list reflecting your requirements and your needs, it's very easy to then highlight the strengths and weaknesses of each of the vendors and not getting into a process where you're going to have a hard time justifying your decision. So now we're talking about transportation management. So we have transportation management operations and system definitions. So that this is how the vendors are competing against each other. And this is the overall for transportation management. So you have Logility, which one of the, again, was at the bottom of the list for the overall. Now they are very good in transportation. See, it's the #1. So it really highlights the point where you need to actually understand your requirements and your needs as opposed to what the vendors are supporting and not, and based on that, make your overall decision. So if transportation is a major concern of your organization, then you have to put the priority on it, and then probably the vendor ranking is going to reflect that. So you can see that Microsoft Dynamics is actually pretty good. It's within 2 percentage points, it's around 89%, QAD as well. In terms of the international trade logistics, now you're looking at the overall QAD, Infor, Dynamics, Pronto, Elite, and Logility is down there with 0, which means that we do not have any international trade logistic functionality, which explains how the overall performance has been down. So if your company doesn't require that functionality, you can set that priority to that to 0, and it will change the score properly. So I'm trying to highlight the importance of priority and what you need, as opposed to what the vendors are supporting or not supporting. Now, supply relationship management, a very good topic on this. Oh, sorry. But overall, it's like that. Now, demand management, again, it's something that very often is part of the core functionality or niche functionality for many organizations. In this case, you can see that Macola, which overall up to now was one of the least performing vendors, now on demand management, it's on top. So it really highlights the point that you really need to know what your understanding is for your processes and your requirements. Supply chain analytics. Again, we have the QAD, Logility at 91 and 84, and Elite is going down. So again, you can see that the range of the vendors that are happening here is, in terms of the ranking, is really depending on the functionality that you're looking at. And here we are talking about order management, and within the order management, now Infor is at 98%, almost 100, and depending on the various functionality, you can see that the strengths and weaknesses for each of these vendors vary. Service parts planning, same thing. And now let's look at the different various considerations within the phase 3, which is qualitative assessment of your evaluation. So what you do up till now, based on that analysis, you can come up with the first 2, 3, or 4 vendors that you want to consider to go to the next phase, which is qualitative assessment of your software. What you do at the qualitative assessment, you create the scripted demo. In the scripted demo, you pick the critical functionality of the processes that you want and create the script, give it to the vendors, and they try to show you how their application and their software actually delivers that process for you. There, you actually have your people, your key users, come in and sit down and look at the demos to evaluate the process fit, the ease of use, your overall functionality assessment, key technology offerings that vendors do offer, any process improvement that they see, and the quality of presentations, which is very good assessment of the capability of the system integrators in terms of understanding your business, and also understanding if they know the best practices for your industry. So all of that becomes part of the qualitative assessment of the demo screens, which allows you to put that as part of your decision model. Then the other aspect of the qualitative assessment is the supplier and implementation evaluation, which is their corporate profile, the financial profile, product strategy, implementation services they offer, consulting services that they offer, the quality or the training services that they offer, and pricing, customer base, and references. So these are all different questions that you may ask at this level in terms of the total number of revenues, if they have any lawsuits against them, if they have happy clients or unhappy clients. All of these are part of the assessment at this level. Then you have a third part, which is part of how they're going to deliver the project in terms of project quality assessment. So their project plan, the project team, the cost calculations and considerations, the ROI calculations, and you can also evaluate or rate the technical RFP that they provide to you. So all of these are the different components that goes into the overall decision model that you can actually then evaluate the vendors on. The last piece, which is as I explained before, that the negotiation is going to be in 2 phases. One is the contract, the next one is the price. So we recommend that you understand each and every term in the contract, make sure that you agree with all of them, and don't sign anything that you do not agree with, not thinking that, oh, it's not going to happen, because it's going to happen. And also, again, get your purchasing people involved in the process, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that know your purchasing and your thresholds within the terms and conditions. But at the same time, ask for a professional help in terms of the technical assessment of your contract. When it comes to the price, make sure that you know all the cost components, and avoid any open-ended statement of works. So the time and material kind of contracts are usually recipe for disaster for the implementation of the enterprise applications. Try as much as possible to negotiate a fixed price deal, And also, vendors have end of quarter, end of year discounts. Make sure that you can take care of that and take advantage of that. And also, another important part is the volume discount. So try to negotiate all of your needs and at once. So don't think of buying hundreds of licenses at a time. If you're if at the end of the day you need 300 licenses, try to negotiate the terms for 300 licenses upfront, which will give you a considerable amount of savings. Now, as the last piece of advice, as I said many times during this presentation, requirements gathering is a must. You need to understand your requirements. So at the same time, we're not talking about a business process model. We don't recommend a detailed business process modeling, except in some of the key areas, critical areas of your business that you may want to get into a little bit more detail in terms of understanding your processes. What we need is a very high level understanding of your business processes, and that should suffice. So we see companies that go through months-long projects in terms of getting their business process models done before getting anywhere. That's an overkill and waste of time. We think that a couple of weeks of high-level business process modeling should be okay, and that also allows you to build consensus around the new architecture. So get everybody around your organization, understand the new architecture, and based on that, go forward. And another topic that comes up often is the BPR, or business process engineering. We think that has to be done by the vendor and the best vendor selection, something that you don't want to do during the selection, which means that you need to insist on best practice implementation and only select the vendors that have, to your best knowledge, the best practice knowledge of your industry, and work with them and with their partners. Which means that if you select the right vendor with the best practice approach, you can avoid customization and minimize the level of customization for the implementation. Now, the bottom line is that you need to clearly identify or define this scope before going anywhere within your selection project. That ends my presentation, and I think we have a couple of minutes left for the question and answer. So go back to you, Brendan. So if you have any questions that are coming up, just let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mehdi. I think that was very informative, and thank you all for attending our webinar as well. We hope that you found the information helpful for your business. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to take the chance to invite you all to attend our Enterprise Software Showcase for ERP event. It's coming up this spring. It's moderated by Tech, and this event takes place from April 25th to the 27th in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's a one-of-a-kind opportunity to witness back-to-back ERP solution demos from major vendors, learn about the latest in ERP industry news, and to network with leading ERP experts. You'll have the opportunity to connect with tech software selection experts and learn best practice tips for your next selection project. This is an invaluable opportunity for anyone interested to learn about more ERP software, and for those companies currently seeking an ERP solution for their business. We have a few promotions as well for this event. So we have a promotion for webinar attendees. It's $100 off for the registration fee, and the deadline to register is April 23rd, 2023. We also have a $100 referral bonus for referring a colleague or a friend to register for the event, which will be issued following the person's registration and the notification of the referrer's name. We actually have a QR code. I don't know, Oscar, if you can let me share my screen so I can show the QR code for those attendees. Prior to that, I guess. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Let me share my screen. So this screen that you see now, the QR code on screen, it will. Sorry, give me 1 second. This QR code is going to direct you to the event registration page online, and this is the one that will give you the discount as well, if anyone is so inclined. But we can get to the questions now. So we have one question. Mehdi, what is your recommendation for any company for the next upgrade, and how often should it be?
Okay, typically, depending on the changes in your business. So if your business has gone through changes since your last upgrade, you may want to have an evaluation of the system done. There is no real timeline. I would say within 5 years of your implementation, you definitely have to start looking at possible upgrades or changes to your system. But it could actually happen way before that. So if there are changes to your business, if there are changes in the market, you may want to have a look at the architecture. But at the same time, you have to look at if the current software fulfills the requirements of your business. If there are tons of gaps and you have to buy different applications, or you're using lots of Excel sheets to support your system, that is usually typically the identifiers of the problem where you need to actually go for an upgrade or change of your system. But if you want a date, I would say within 5 years of the last implementation, you need to actually have a look. Now, in some cases, it could be sooner if the original selection and evaluation wasn't done properly and taking into account the future requirements of your organization.
Okay. Another question we have is, what are the major types of SCM software?
What are the major types? I don't get that. Different.
I'm not sure. Major types of SCM software. If anything, we could also. There's another one here as well. We can go to if.
Yeah, the major types. If you're talking about the the functionality, you can have as I explained before, you have the different software that really focuses on one aspect of the SCM functionality in total. For example, the warehouse management, supplier management. These are the different aspects of the enterprise supply chain management that you can focus on.
Okay. Another question that we have is, what are the possible replacements for SAP Business One, SAP ECC, or any other software?
Oh, that's a $1 million question. So, what if you're talking about upgrading on the SAP path? Like if you want to stick with SAP, the logical replacement of ECC 6 is S/4HANA. But many companies, if you have to go through an upgrade from ECC to S/4HANA, it's a completely new implementation and even a new contract with SAP. So that means that you may as well look at the different applications that are out there. So you may want to, at the same time, if you're going through a new implementation, come up with maybe a more fit solution if you're not happy with the current ECC6 implementation. But definitely ECC6 is something that needs to be replaced because it's been a while since SAP has come up with a new version.
Okay, that's very helpful. What about for small companies? What are the best SCM systems for small companies? That's another question we have.
Some of the items that have some of the some of the vendors that I was showing throughout my presentations are good choices. You can have, as I said, like depending on how you define the small, like small to us is between $50 to $100 million. So you can actually have QAD Infor products are very good for that range of users. Microsoft could be a good option as well.
Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more questions. With the recession coming, is this a good time to select and implement an SCM solution, or should companies wait?
What's that? Sorry, I couldn't.
Oh, sorry. With the recession coming, they wanted to know if now would be a good time to go through the selection project, or if it's better to wait.
It really depends on your business, and within the recessions, there are certain organizations, certain industries that thrive even with the recession. Investing in your software platforms and IT infrastructure, I would say the best time is where the economy is down. So if there are less traction or less, if your business in general is less busy, it's the right time to invest some time internally to revamp your internal organization. So when the economy picks up and your orders are coming in with much more speed, you have the system right there to achieve it. Of course, you need to have the cash flow and the proper financial backing to be able to survive the implementation and the recession at the same time.
Right. We have a follow-up as well to the question about jumping from SAP Business One. Does it make more sense to jump from Business One to SAP ECC first, or should it be directly to SAP S/4HANA?
Business One, and there's no point of going interim to ECC6. Business One and S/4HANA, they're basically two separate products, as well as the ECC6 and Business One. So I don't think there should be an interim implementation to ECC6. If you're planning to go with ECC, or if you're planning to go with SAP S/4HANA, you may as well do the jump in one shot, because it's going to cost you less, and there's going to be less change management and training involved. But going from Business One to S/4HANA is a huge undertaking. So you're talking about two separate platforms. So you may as well look at different alternatives that are out there.
Right.
It's going to be less cost.
Yeah, so going directly from one to the other just makes more sense than having an intermediary between, because cost-wise doesn't make sense. Perfect. I think that's all the time we have for questions. I'd like to remind everyone again that there's an event coming up in the spring, which is ESS for ERP Spring Edition, and it's 25th to the 27th of April in Scottsdale, Arizona. And again, the QR code on the screen is it takes you to the event page with a reduction for the cost for attendees. So thank you so much again, Mehdi, for the presentation. It was very informative, and thank you everyone for coming out today.
Thank you very much.